I had promised this video today. Yvonne and the kids have headed off for a day of frivolity, and I've stayed behind to talk to people wearing a jersey that Yvonne got me, ordered for me. So this is the last Canucks jersey I didn't have. I have a lot of Canucks jerseys, and this is the last one I didn't have. Sadly, I don't have a hat that matches these colors. But that's the last of my concerns. It's not really a concern at all. The silver, the blue, the maroon. It's a jersey I never had, and I always wanted, and thanks to my lovely wife, I now have. So that being said, let's get to grading teams, shall we? Now, this is at the halfway mark, and this is when I grade teams. This is how I grade them compared to where they should be, and in terms of their performance. There are teams that I would give a poor grade to because they should be better than where they're at, and teams I'll give a good grade to because they're better than what they were supposed to be. Start with Anaheim. I'm going to go alphabetical here. I'll put Anaheim as a solid B. Anaheim's a B due to their overall performance. They had a rough first quarter. They've had a decent second quarter. Now they're healthy, and we'll see where they go from here. The screaming Arizona Coyotes, I can't, well, maybe an F is just too brutal. I just can't give anybody an F. That's just brutal. But I will give Arizona a D. The shrieking Coyote. What is there to say? The huge winless streak at the start of the season kind of sank them, and they haven't played a lot better since then. Now, they're unbeaten in 2018, as somebody's pointed out, but small sample sizes being as they are, I'm still giving them the D. Giving them a D as a grade. I'm not giving them the... We're just going to get out of that. Boston, I'll give them a B. The way they've been playing lately, they've been better than what they were to start the season. And the Bruins look like they are buying into what Coach Cassidy is selling. And I'm very excited about the Boston's future. Now, I don't know how far they go this year. I don't know that they're going to necessarily be a contender come playoff time, but at least they look really good now. Buffalo wants to make sure that Arizona doesn't want to feel lonely in the D section. They've won 10 games out of 40. You can't give them a passing grade for that. Calgary, C. And not just because that matches their logo. The Flames have been very consistently inconsistent. Today, Glenn Gulletson threw his stick into the crowd, and I made a big deal about it only because it's on camera. Coaches lose their temper all the time. There really isn't anything to see here. I'm actually kind of glad to see that kind of fire from Gulletson. Anytime I've seen him in interviews, I know when he coached Dallas and then when he was an assistant coach in Vancouver, it just seemed like he wasn't as intense as I kind of hoped a guy would be as a head coach. So it's nice to see him doing that in Calgary. And rightfully so, because they are not in the playoff picture right now. They're middling, and that's not going to be good enough. Carolina, they go into the B section as well. The Hurricanes have played some very solid hockey the second quarter. The first quarter, they weren't great, but they were still close. So they'd be losing a lot of games, but at least they were close. They weren't getting blown out. And now they're starting to win those games. Chicago. Well, see, it's hard for me to qualify them as a B or a D because I can't give them a failing grade exactly. They're not that far out of the playoff picture, but they are last in their division. And, concerns over just how many miles some of these players have on them starting to surface. About time. And I've mentioned that before, and I've got some brushback for it. But when you've played a lot of playoff hockey and you've played a lot of games over the years, it does add up. Those extra miles do add up. And we're starting to see that with Chicago and, to be honest, with Pittsburgh. These teams are just tired, and there needs to be a shift. I don't want to say the rebuild word because I don't think they necessarily need it, but Chicago is in flux. Colorado, I'm going to put them in A. I'm going to put Colorado in A, not because their logo is an A. I'm going to put them in it as an A because not one of us, including myself, expected them to be this good. We didn't expect them to be within shouting distance of a playoff spot and ahead of the Blackhawks. And they are. And right now, the way they're playing, they could very well make the playoffs. It's crazy. It's insane. But Colorado, in my eyes, have overachieved this year. They were a 48-point team last year. They were down where these guys are right now, and it's a year later, and look where they are. So maybe Arizona and Buffalo can look at them and say, oh, there's hope. Columbus, I'll throw them under the C. And I understand, too, that when I did these for the first quarter, I had C+, C, C- kind of thing. I'm not doing that this time around. I'm just going to make it just a simple 4 different grades. And not rank them by who's doing better in each grade. But just say that Columbus has not been as good as they were last year. They've fallen back, and they're in danger of falling further back. Columbus has the team that can win. They have a coach that can win. And they have, I think, arguably the best goaltender in the NHL. It is becoming arguably because somebody else is stealing that Vezina from him as we speak. Some goalie out of Tampa. But Bobrovsky's still one of the best, and they're still playing relatively well. Dallas, I gave them a rough grade the first quarter. I'll give them a B for the first half. They've got better lately. And despite any concerns I may have, they have a decent record. They're in the playoffs. They're better than they were last year. So for that reason, I have no problem giving Dallas a B as a grade. Detroit, I'm actually going to have as a C. Now, if I'd done this a few weeks ago, they would have been in this area. But they've had a decent run. They're still playing games that are important, and it's January 5th. The fact that it's the third month of the season, and they're still, they've done October, November, December, Shannon, so it's the fourth month of the season, and there's still important games being played, tells you that they're doing better than a lot of us thought they would. Detroit, if they add the right pieces at the deadline, and I didn't think I'd see the day I said this, not this season anyways, the fact that if they add the right pieces at the deadline, they could be really dangerous. Absolutely. Edmonton, for the half, is a D. This is absolute failure by the Edmonton Oilers to be where they're at after last season. They didn't really lose anything. Sekera's back. I thought that would help them, and it's been they're still just kind of bumping along at or near the bottom of the standings. It's not good enough. The winning streak they had and the fact they have a decent record in their last 8 games, it doesn't, for me, pull them out of being a D grade on this one. Florida, I am stunned to be doing this, but Florida is a B. Because Florida, see now Edmonton's a D because they were one of the best teams coming into this league, apparently. They were supposed to win all these Stanley Cups, hasn't happened. Florida was supposed to be bottom feeder all year, and they're actually putting together some wins, and they are in a conversation to do with the playoffs. And it's unexpected, really. Especially with the fact that they've got better since Luongo got hurt. And we all expected the wheels to kind of fall off with James Reimer. Reimer's played very well. I don't expect them to make the playoffs, but they get a B for the fact that they're close to it. The Kings have been an A. The Los Angeles Kings have somehow found that mojo again. Maybe missing the playoffs helped them. And this is coming back to Chicago and Pittsburgh. Missing the playoffs means you're off that 2 weeks earlier and you're angry. You're angry because you missed the playoffs. It's embarrassing. And it can give you a spark that next season if you use it right. And LA clearly has. They made the right moves in the offseason. They added some speed and some youth into that lineup. Iafallo doesn't get talked about a lot, but he's been really good. And Kempe is one of the unheralded rookies this year. He's not going to end up being a top point-producing rookie, but watch for him 2 or 3 years from now. He will be a very good point producer in the NHL. At least that's my opinion. Very, very solid performance by LA. Minnesota, based on their second quarter being pretty good, I will throw them into the B section. Minnesota has been solid, and they've been getting healthier, and now they're fully healthy, and they look like it. They're coming off of last night, their 6-2 win over Buffalo. Again, Buffalo's over here, so it's all a matter of degrees, but Minnesota's now winning the games they should, and they're in every other game too. And they're winning some of those games. So Minnesota's now got themselves back in the playoff discussion. Montreal. Well, Montreal has to be a D. They were first in their division last year. This year, they look like they may not make the playoffs. Their scoring is anemic, and their scoring's been anemic for a while. They just don't have that top-end first-line center. It's not Jonathan Drouin's fault. He's just not the guy. He's not the guy you build around. And they traded out Sergachev, which looks, really honestly, it looks like a mistake. In that their blue line needs a guy like Sergachev on it. Nashville, I would have given him an A a couple weeks ago. Now I'm going to give him a B. They've been playing some really solid games, but they've played some iffy ones too. And they're right up about where they were expected to be. So again, a B is not a failing grade. It's just not an A. Welcome to class. But yeah, for me, Nashville's a B. I still think they're a contender come playoff time. New Jersey. Welcome to the land of the A students. I know they've lost some games lately. I know they've slid back a bit, and I know New Jersey fans are nervous about that. But I still think there's enough pieces in New Jersey, and I still think Corey Schneider is good enough that they can make the playoffs. The fact they are where they are right now gives them an A. I don't know that that'll be their grade at the end of the year, but for me right now, New Jersey is an A. The Islanders are finding themselves slipping and sliding, so they would have been a B a couple weeks ago. Now they're a C. I don't know where to start with what's going on with the Islanders, but it's not great. But I could start with goaltending. And I felt bad too. I was watching last night, and it's 5-3 Philly. And I said to Yvonne, I said, before today's game, I felt like I was just beating a dead horse by talking about the Islanders' goaltending problems. But there's another 5 spot against them. It is hard to argue that the Islanders don't need to fix it, and that they're not risking losing the playoffs in a season where they're trying to entice Tavares to stay. The Rangers, for me, are a B. They had a very poor first 10 games of the season, which was very much ballyhooed and written about. They've been very good since then. I still see them as being probably a level below, true Stanley Cup contender. Can't really see them winning a Stanley Cup, but they've been very good. They've been better than some people thought they would be this year. And so far, so good for the Rangers. They look like they're on pace for another playoff season, and we'll see what happens. Ottawa. Well, I can't not give Ottawa a D grade. And this is where it becomes kind of upsetting that I've got 3 Canadian teams as Ds and 1 as a C. And so far, there's no Canadian teams above C. Last year, there was much said about how Canadian teams had turned it around and maybe a Stanley Cup was coming to Canada. And Ottawa was seen as probably the best chance at that after their run to the semifinals, conference championships. And I was very excited in those conference championships. I really wanted them to beat Pittsburgh, and it just about happened, and then it didn't. Ottawa's got a lot of work to do. And this season has really revealed just there are some flaws in this roster, and once the results started going against them, it just snowballed from there. So Ottawa is right now on the outside looking in. Philly, I can't grade them above C, and I can't grade them below C. They didn't make the playoffs last year. I didn't favor them to make the playoffs this year. I said I think next year's when they get really good. So far, I seem to be right on both sides in that they're good, they're not great. They're good enough to not be last place in their division by a lot, and the Metro's a pretty solid division, but they're still not a playoff team. So I can only grant them a C right now. Pittsburgh. You know what? I'm not going to be mean to Pittsburgh. I'm going to give them a C because while their record is not where it was supposed to be, it's easy to forget that there were some games here that got lost by Niemi early on. There were some games that they lost due to back-to-backs. There's been a lot going on, and the team is really honestly exhausted, I believe. I can't give them a D because they're still in shouting distance of the playoffs, and it's Pittsburgh. They still have nights where they look fantastic. They've been fewer and farther between over the last month, but I do think they can still go on somewhat of a run. They get a C because they're not where they were supposed to be, but I can't put them back here because they're not in that area. Not for me anyways. They could end up here at the end of the season, though. St. Louis, I'm going to go ahead and slot them in as an A, and I'll say why. Um, it's easy to forget St. Louis. You can talk about Chicago in the Central because Chicago's got those Stanley Cups. Right now, Winnipeg is a sexy pick because of their accomplishments, and Nashville based on their Stanley Cup final appearance last year. It's easy to kind of forget St. Louis is in the mix, but they are, and they've been very good. And even though they haven't had a great last 10 games, they're still in a top 3 spot in that division, and they still look good for probably home ice in the first round. I still think they'll somehow get second place in that division, and I've been really impressed with Carter Hutton. I've been really impressed with a lot of members of the Blues individually, and I do think that while you're going to see Shen, cool down quite a bit, and there are certain members of the team that need to pick it up a little bit, I do still have them as an A. San Jose, a B. They're third in their division. They're where they should be. They're a playoff team. San Jose, no matter how old Joe Thornton gets, they'll get to the playoffs somehow. I think they've only missed once since he got there. You guys can correct me. I know it's only been once in recent years. And they did get to a Stanley Cup final once. They're not at that level now, but they've been very good. Tampa, yeah, well, they've got to be an A, right? Because Tampa has been the best team in the league from the start of the season. Now, there's been some challenges to that spot, but not consistently. Tampa has played some of the best hockey I've seen any team play in the last 5 years. And they deserve an A for what they've done so far this season, and I don't anticipate that dropping in the second half. Toronto. Well, I'm below the lines now, but you guys can still see that Toronto's in the Bs. Toronto's had a good season so far. Matthews has been good. Everything's been fine. When Matthews gets hurt, it can be touch and go. There are still concerns about the blue line in Toronto, but they're good enough that for me they get a B. They're on pace for a few more points than last year, a little bit of an improvement, which is to be expected. And as they develop into being the Stanley Cup contender that I think they should be, probably next year, and I've said that before, and I know, certainly fans don't like to hear it, but I do think that they get maybe home ice advantage in the first round this year, get out of the first round, and probably drop in the second round, and then it's next year when we can start talking about how good the Leafs can be and a Stanley Cup at that point. It usually takes teams a couple of years figuring it out, and then they push on through. The Blackhawks, for instance, they won their Stanley Cup in 2010, but they became a really good team before that, and they had a couple of setbacks before they became Stanley Cup champions. You have to lose to learn how to win. Vancouver, compared to where they were supposed to be, they're doing well, and there's injury issues, and there's Brock, and that's the sound of my brain exploding. I'm going to put them between a C and a D. A C for the efforts of a lot of their players, and a D for the overall result. I can see where the team's going and that it's going to get better, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. So, and I can't drop them down to here because they're missing Besser. They're missing Berchi. They were missing Tanev for a lot of this point. And, the goaltending really hasn't been there to bail them out. You guys are going to make me choose, aren't you? If I have to choose, I'll put them here. But again, the injuries haven't helped. The Canucks, there's a lot of work left to be done. And it's not going to be, this year's not the year. So I would look for Pettersson to come in next season. I would look for Dahlin to get a shot at the lineup next season as well, to play with Pettersson potentially. I would look for Levy to get a long look at the training camp. And, him to get a roster spot coming out of training camp. But that's all next season. This season for the Canucks, it's just kind of blown up. Vegas, D. They made me look bad. They've made me look really bad. I'm just kidding. Obviously an A. They've earned more points in half of a season, a little under half of a season, than most expansion teams would put up in a regular season. Completely. Vegas is playing some fantastic hockey. Even when they lose, they look good. And there's very few teams that have that going for them. Washington. I'm going to go with a surprising pick and put Washington as an A. They sacrificed a lot of depth. They lost a lot of guys in the offseason. And they made some questionable decisions in the offseason. And they replaced these guys they lost with prospects, cast-offs, and players that I don't think any of us expected to necessarily be of much help. It was expected Washington would probably take a dive back. I'd expected them to finish, I thought, in the playoffs, but I believe I had them fourth in the division, making the playoffs, and I felt they were really going to fall back. Right now, it doesn't look like Washington's falling back at all. They have no intention of falling back, and they've really played so well. Compared to what I had expected, this has been a very good start for them. And finally, Le Jets, who get an A based on the fact that they have exceeded expectations. They've been a really, really good team from the start of the year until now. They've had their bumps and bruises along the way in terms of both their record and injuries, but even without Mark Scheifele, they look really good. And that's saying something because, as I said, Toronto had their bobbles without Matthews. Winnipeg, Mark Scheifele is just as important to Winnipeg as Matthews is to Toronto. You guys can discuss that below, but he is. And for Winnipeg to still be able to put up some impressive wins without him, and I'm not saying Toronto didn't, but it's different. Winnipeg has been very solid. And goaltending and defense in Winnipeg has been much better than I think I'd anticipated, and I think than anybody had anticipated. And they didn't need Mason to do it. It was Hellebuck. The answer to all their problems was there all along. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Let me know what grades you would provide for teams. But there's all 31, and the 31 grades I provided. The only failing grades, Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton, Buffalo, and Arizona. And again, this is 4 Canadian teams here. So if you want to get an idea of how Canada's doing, you got 4 teams that are Ds, 1 that's a C, and there's 1 B, and then, yeah, wow, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 A, 1 B, 1 C, and 4 Ds. So that's a rough year for Canada. And the only ones right now sitting in playoff spots, Toronto and Winnipeg. So unless they meet in the Stanley Cup final, we likely don't see a Canadian Stanley Cup champion this year. But maybe Winnipeg continues to prove me wrong, and maybe Toronto's ready now. Let me know what you guys think. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And hey, 26,000 was reached today. We can go higher. I know we can go higher. And thank you for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.